I finished the fourth of my Lovecraft stories, and it's the one I like the least so far, and it's the Dunwich Horror. And it's kind of, I think, my least favorite simply because this is just a non linear storyline. Like, it seems like it has a. It seems like it has an ending, and then the ending isn't the ending. And that a little bit happens in A Color in Space, but in this one, it happens even more. It's about this strange father-daughter pair who lives out in the middle of nowhere and in the backwoods, kind of like Color Out of Space was. And one day the daughter, whose name is Lavinia, shows up and she's had a child. This child is really weird. He grows too fast. He looks way older than he should. No one has ever seen him, like, not dressed the whole way up his neck and clothing the whole way down to his ankles and stuff like that. He eventually is the only one left of the family. The father dies, or the grandfather dies, and he talks about, how this kid, whose name is Wilbur Whately, that he is going to be the one who, he will talk with his father, and there will be some big thing that happens. So Wilbur is trying to translate this old book that they have, and it turns out it's part of the Necronomicon, which is another thing that Lovecraft was really big into creating, and came up in his writings a lot, the arcane knowledge, and in the Book of Arcane Knowledge and Forbidden Knowledge. And Wilbur finds out that there are several copies that he can finish his translations of what he was trying to do with his book. One of them is nearby, and he goes to try to translate this. He's real reluctant to leave the farm because there's something weird with the farm too. It seems like the grandfather used to buy cattle. His herd of cattle never got bigger. But he seemed like he bought cattle and they would disappear, and then they built an extension onto their house that had like this big ramp that went up to the second floor attic and kind of into the hillside. Very, very strange. People heard strange noises coming from the attic. So Wilbur has gone here and he's trying to get a hold of this copy of the Necronomicon, and the professor who is there is like, no, you can't have it, because he thinks there's something up very weird with this guy who's coming in here. And Whately tries to go around and get other copies of the Necronomicon and fails because the professor keeps writing to these other institutions and saying, don't let this guy have this book, there's something strange going on. And eventually dogs don't like Wilbur. That's another feature in this that only gets mentioned because the professor late at night hears the dogs going crazy. They go out there, they find the dog has mauled someone or something to death, and in the library where the book is kept, and they find out that it is Wilbur, but the mauling has ripped his clothes all up, and he is very clearly not human. His body, apart from his head, has like stunted tentacles and weird colors and fur and just weird stuff. So they're like, okay, this isn't normal. And meanwhile, back at the farm that Whately came from, the locals are all freaking out because something has exploded the house and is now roaming around the countryside. And whatever it is huge and getting larger and is eating the livestock and mowing down the fields and trees and whatever else. It has killed some locals. No one has seen it really closely, but everybody's freaking out because they know it's there. So the professor thinks that he knows what it is, or at least he has some indication of what's happened. He gets a incantation, I guess, from the Necronomicon, and goes and he says that he thinks that this will stop the creature thing that's happening. Someone finally gets a look at the creature, and he's like, oh, it's terrible. It looks like a big blobby type thing with like tentacles and eyes and mouths and like a human head on top of it. It's pretty much the Blob. It's literally, I can't prove it, but the movie The Blob seems to have come from this because it's the same idea. It's something that is kind of like a unformed thing that is absorbing other stuff and getting bigger from that. In this case, it is Wilbur and this thing, it turns out, were twin brothers, actually, and the one that was kept in the attic is, they say, looks more like his father. So their father was one of the elder gods, specifically Yog-Sothoth is the one they keep talking about in here. And I don't like this story. For one thing, the ultimate climate, and it's odd because the Dunwich Horror has been filmed a couple times, and I believe the same one who did Color Out of Space, that same director, wants to do his next one. He wants to do is the Dunwich Horror. And I suppose the titillation is somebody having a child with an elder god. I guess that's the kind of salacious draw to it, I suppose. But as a story, it's not great. To me. I suppose that this is one of Lovecraft's better known ones, but it's not as enjoyable. The cohesion of the story is a little all over the place because he's treating it more like mythology than he's treating it like a short story. And to me, the climax and ultimate thing should have been when the reveal happens with Wilbur Whatley. Or that reveal should have happened at the same time the reveal was that his brother was a monster in the attic. That sort of a thing. It feels like it drags on after Wilbur dies. It feels like it just keeps going because they're running around the countryside trying to find this huge thing, which you have some indication of what it is, but it just doesn't. That last part feels like it should have been shorter, or it should have been tied with the reveal of the fact that Wilbur wasn't really human. I don't know. It's just one of those stories that I feel like goes on too long. This was, and it is one of Lovecraft. It is a bit longer, but it feels that way. It feels like he should have trimmed it up, or should have taken that reveal of what the monstrous thing was and kind of had that tied with what Wilbur was, because it seems like there's two separate things going on. Them trying to stop Wilbur, who's been the main thing of all of this, and the reveal of what was in the attic. And this is, I don't know, this is one that I could have skipped of all this. I suppose this is one of his better known, and it does fall into his mythos, and there's this big horrible thing of somebody procreating with an elder god, and that sort of feature coming along. I really think this was Lovecraft's attempt, and he kind of mentions it in here he mentions it in the story. It was his attempt at writing the great god Pan. I know I forget what that author's name is, Machen. I know he really liked that author, and I know the great god Pan is one of the kind of original folk horror type of kind of a little bit cosmic-y horror stories. It's not really cosmic horror, but it's kind of tied to that, like a god being involved with human stuff, and it kind of being a horrible thing. And that's kind of what's going on here. So it almost feels like Lovecraft's trying to make his own homage to that with his group of elder gods, just in a different vein of things. It doesn't hold. It's a little messy. And I know I'm sitting here critiquing Lovecraft, but as someone who's just sitting and reading a short story, it's not a great short story, because it feels like it should have ended sooner, and it feels like it shouldn't have kept dragging. They kept going to the woods, and they kept finding more destruction and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, we know whatever was up in the attic and is doing it. We know that. Wrap it up. And it also feels like the ending's a bit anticlimactic, because they just sort of see the professors go over the hill, and then whatever it is gets defeated, and then they come back, and they're like, oh, they must have defeated it. It's very like Tolkien, The Hobbit, someone gets knocked out and the whole battle happens and no one sees it. And that's kind of what happens here again. And Lovecraft does that a lot. He does I describe a lot without describing. And in this case, he just didn't even describe. He's like, yeah, it happened over that hill. So, of the four, this one is, at this point in time, this is the one that would be voted off the island here, just because it's not great. It's okay. I guess it's for Lovecraft, it's an okay story, but for just a short story, not the best. So, that is the fourth one. The last one is Shadow over Innsmouth, which is very, very long, that I have to read. I believe it's actually called a novella, but technically it's a short story, I guess. But that's the last one, and hopefully it's a little better than the Dunwich Horror.